Thanks for download. If you're enjoying the pod series, then please follow The Unconventional Soldier on Spotify, Apple or wherever you listen. If you can, leave a decent review, share it with a mate, and help keep these stories of soldiering history alive while supporting veteran voices that rarely get heard. Positive reviews and recommendations really help bring us to the attention of new listeners. If you want to help keep the mic on and the episodes flowing, then head to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, as every brew keeps us in the fight by lowering production costs, and many thanks to our recent contributors. By the late 1990s, the Balkans had become the focus of some of the most brutal conflicts seen in Europe since the Second World War. After years of tension, the Kosovo War erupted in 1998 on the 28th of February, and went on until 11th of June 1999. It was fought between the forces of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and the Kosovo Albanian separatist militia known as the Kosovo Liberation Army. The conflict was marked by ethnic cleansing, mass killings and the displacement of nearly 1 million people. Images of burning villages and convoys of refugees filled television screens across the world, forcing NATO to act. In March 1999, airstrikes began which resulted in Yugoslav forces withdrawing from Kosovo. But as so often happens, ending the fighting was only the beginning. A massive international peacekeeping mission followed, involving NATO troops under KFOR, the United Nations and a host of international organisations, all tasked with rebuilding a fractured society and preventing a return to violence. For many on the ground, this was a mission unlike any they'd faced before. Soldiers, police and civilians had to navigate destroyed infrastructure, hostile militias, traumatised communities and the ever-present threat of a renewed conflict. In today's episode I'm joined by Andy, a former officer of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, who deployed to Kosovo with the RUC as part of the UN International Peacekeeping Mission. His unique perspective offers a window into what it was like to move from a domestic conflict in the UK to an international operation in the Balkans, and the challenges of maintaining law and order and stability in the aftermath of war. If you're interested in more episodes about the RUC, Andy appeared on Pod 44 when he discussed his time in the force and service in the RUC's Specialist Surveillance Unit, E4A. Let's crack on. Andy, great to see you, mate, and thanks for coming back on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me back again, Colin.
So you deployed to Kosovo with the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and I'll call that the RUC from now on, for a year in 1999. What was the reason and the background to the tour?
As your listeners are probably aware, the Kosovo conflict had just come to an end, and the country needed to re-establish all its infrastructure and law and order. So it was a UN resolution to put in UN police force. Now, this wasn't going to be a mentoring mission, and it wasn't going to be a tutoring mission or a monitoring. It was about law enforcement. The UN asked various countries to contribute, and the British government was quite keen to make a contribution. However, the situation in the Balkans dictated that the mission would be an armed mission. And as everybody knows, the UK police force placed by consent and is not 100% armed. At the same time, the Good Friday Agreement had come in. If you like, the writing was on the wall for the RUC, and I'll sort of come back to that as we go through the answer to this question. It was recognised that we had a unique experience for working alongside the military, working in conflict zones and policing more complex situations. It was decided that 60 officers would deploy from the RUC. Came about, I think, mid-1999. The wheels moved very, very slowly, and our deployment date kept getting put back. And at the time, I thought it was because they were providing us with more training and more pre-deployment training. But looking back now, a bit older and a bit wiser, and I think it was obviously the toings and froings of the government working out the political situation, whether it was right. And obviously, the RUC is a contentious force in the eyes of some people. It was seen, I think, by parts of the community as rewarding the RUC for its service. Another side of the community would think, why are you foisting this organisation on other countries in the world? Personally, again, now looking back, I think, and it was touted by the government that, we were one of the world leaders in this type of policing. The world stage would benefit from the unique skill set of the RUC. fast forward maybe 18 months on from our deployment, possibly 2 years, the force has its name changed. George Cross is issued. And I think this was another one of those carrots before the big stick came.
It's interesting because if you're not doing mentoring and you're actually acting as a de facto police force, did you have powers of arrest, all that type of thing? And how did you mesh in with judicial system in Kosovo if you had to make arrests?
When we arrived, there was no judicial system. I spent all my service in Pristina, which is, as you know, is the capital. And within Pristina, there was a detention center. Anybody that we arrested, you took to the detention center and they were processed. They had a limited amount of holding cells. And then outside of the town, I was further down the country. I think it's about 30, 40-minute drive. There was a prison where they could put people, but there was no court system at that time. So anybody either came in, was processed, and it was decided, well, it's not serious enough, we'll get back to you at a later date, or they were detained, for example, of murders, rapes. They would be detained initially in the detention center, then transferred to the prison, and again would be dealt with it at a later date. It was very much you went with the flow and you did what you could. As for powers of arrest, we basically worked on what we've been taught in the UK, and other nations, I believe, did the same. So there would be differences of opinion, especially when you're working with other nationalities, of how to deal with things. And it was very much down to the guys and girls on the ground, what they did and how they proceeded. The problem would be there. Yes, you could call a supervisor, but very often they wouldn't have any more authority or any more power or any more resources available. And I know you've done this on other pods when you talk about junior NCOs war. It was very much a junior ranks policing mission.
It's interesting the parallels that you mentioned at the start there are between Northern Ireland and Kosovo, because essentially it's not that far removed, except you had the full war in Kosovo, but you've got different factions opposing each other, crime, murders, going back centuries. We'll go on to pre-deployment training in a minute. In fact, we'll go into that now, because what I want to ask you is, if you just go over the pre-deployment training that you carried out, and obviously you'd have stuff like force protection, weapon handling, but also, did you delve into the history quite a bit, and did it strike parallels with you with Northern Ireland?
We had various lecturers come in and speak to us about the complex situation in Kosovo, the religious and sort of racial divide, and the history of the Balkan region. We were actually transported as a group down to the Garda Síochána training centre in Southern Ireland, because they'd been involved in UN missions only on a mentoring side or possibly monitoring. But again, us going down there was very, very political and caused quite a stir. Even though over the years officers had gone down there for courses, it never happened on this scale. Going back to your question, yeah, parallels were plain to see. And again, I think that's another reason why we were a good fit for the deployment.
When you went to this training centre, what sort of training did you do to enhance the skills for going out there?
It was decided we would go down, and again, looking back now, I think this was also it was a huge political step and another way of sort of bridging the North-South divide after the Good Friday Agreement, and obviously, I think paving the way for the PSNI and more acceptance amongst both communities on both sides of the border. So it was decided the 60 would go down. Even though the Good Friday Agreement was in place, it was decided also that it was too dangerous to make a road move. So we had to fly to Shannon Airport. Once we got off the plane, we never left the tarmac into the terminal. We were loaded onto minivans, and we had an armed escort to their training centre. Basically, everything we did down there was classroom and lecture-based about the experience they had from the UN, how the UN functions, issues that we may encounter as a police service working for the UN. So some of it was really interesting, but I would say it was of limited value because we were going into a law enforcement mission. I think the value was more political and future-proofing possibly the PSNI when it came into service.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we did the podcast previously with you and another podcast, when I read the book by William Matchett about the intelligence of Northern Ireland,
yeah.
I always thought that the RUC and the Southern Irish Police had a sort of quite an antagonistic relationship. And I didn't realise until I read that book that they actually worked quite closely together with regards to intelligence. When you were dealing with the Gardaí down there and the trainers, was it all quite friendly? Was it standoffish? What was the atmosphere like?
No, it was, the hospitality was 100%. They literally rolled the red carpet out for us, the food that we had there, the friendship that we were shown. It absolutely blew me away, because I just going on from what you were saying there, I was a little bit apprehensive. I thought, we're going to go down there. We're being foisted upon them for political reasons. It really opened my eyes, and I ended up speaking to one of their trainers. One of his good friends had actually been killed by Pyra, one of the few Garda to be killed in the south. And he was scathing of Pyra and his support for us. And he said, I've lost one colleague. You guys up there have lost over 300. I don't know how you guys cope with that loss, because the loss of one has been huge on me. And that was quite touching.
Yeah, no, that shows the sort of a different side to what you might think. And your weapons training, patrol skills, and all the type of stuff that you'd normally do as an RUC officer, did you have an enhanced package with that, or was the training that you were already at, the training level you're already at, sufficient?
Yeah, so there was an enhanced package, and what they seem to have put together was similar to a pre-deployment of the military. And I know your previous podcast recently, you talked about NITAD training. They put a training team together, and basically we did, as you say, firearms, we did patrolling, we did specific training for going to the Balkans regarding unexploded munitions, mines, etc., enhanced medical training. The whole spectrum was covered. And this seemed to last forever. And again, going back and looking back in hindsight now, my belief is that it was political delays holding us up, where I kept thinking they were just adding more and more training. And I'm thinking the trainers now must have been having to find fillers for us why the powers that be decided when we were going to deploy. But the 60 of us that were going on the deployment had been cut away from our normal day jobs and normal units, and our timetable was purely on the pre-deployment training. And that was conducted at various locations in Northern Ireland, the usual places, McGilligan, Ballykinler, firearms training, Garnerville.
And did the 60 guys come from all disciplines within RUC, like the uniform branch, surveillance, HMSU, all those type of things? It was a fair old mixture, was it, of skills?
It was a fair old mixture, and I suppose everybody went for their personal reasons. There was two of us who went from E4A. There was, I think, two guys from HMSU, or who had been in HMSU. I think at the time they had gone out seeking promotion and I think they had to go out to get promoted and then come back in. So I don't think they were actively serving in HMSU at the time. CID guys, branch guys, normal beat and patrol or response officers. So the mix across the board was, all the skill set was there.
That's an interesting mix. And you deployed via Macedonia. Why was that?
The airport in Pristina had been destroyed by the Russians, and I think one of your previous guests covered that back in one of the pods, I think, the standoff at the airport.
Yeah, that was, because Kev was there. I remember his phrase, it was a patrol from our old unit, some Pathfinders and some random bods from Hereford, I think. It was Lee Chapman, that's who it was.
Yeah, and that's the famous Mike Jackson quote.
Yeah, I'm not going to start a third world war for you, General.
I went out as one of 6 on the advance party, and we basically we flew from Belfast to Birmingham, and then Birmingham to Vienna, and then Vienna to Macedonia. One of the interesting parts of the journey was during our training and before we deployed, we got these huge silver boxes which we could put our personal kit in, our issue kit, to go out there. We had 6 of these, and then we had another one that had the handguns for the whole deployment in. And we flew to Birmingham, and then the next plane to Vienna was one of the BA City jets, which are quite small. We're sat on the plane, we're ready to take off. We sat for a while. Next minute, two police vehicles came out and parked up near the airplane, and armed police got out. And we're sort of looking. We were all constables travelling, apart from one inspector. And of course, there's maybe 20 people on this plane. Most of them are business types going to Vienna. And they're wondering what the police are doing out there. And then just one of the guys said, it must be about the guns in the hall, with a very strong Northern Ireland accent. So you can imagine the faces. It turned out they couldn't get all of the silver boxes on. So it was decided that the guns wouldn't travel. The inspector and another guy got off, and they had to make a road move to London. And I think they came a day or two after us. Just going on from that, whilst we were doing the deployment training, you had access to go and visit your silver box at any time and put whatever kit in. So, the old faithfuls went. We didn't know how we would be living over there. So I packed the Trangia, I packed meths. A lot of us put pastas and rices and things in on top of the kit we got issued. We got issued some excellent kit to go out there, full Gore-Tex suits. Some of the stuff I'm still wearing now, the windproof gloves, because we had to wear RUC uniform out there, and they realized that wouldn't suffice for the weather. So they had these windproof pullovers made in RUC green, which were absolutely excellent. The old Arctic Warfare camo hats were issued as well. So we got a mixture of police and civilian and military kit.
What happened when you arrived then?
We arrived into the airport at Skopje, and there was a white UN bus waiting for us. The 6 of us were on that, and obviously there were other officers just arriving to be deployed, and there were people returning from leave. So there was a bit of a wait at Skopje while we all got documented and the coach got loaded, and then off we went up the road north to Kosovo. We got to the Macedonian-Kosovo border, and there's a huge queue. Nothing was moving. Nothing seemed to going to be moving for a long time. So we piled out and went to the border post. And on the border post, at that time, it was being run by Greek soldiers. And they explained that the Macedonians were playing up, and this was their normal thing. They see all this material and money moving north into Kosovo. They're being used basically as a conduit to pass things up, and not a lot of it was staying with them. They just decided to go slow. So we ended up having a very long afternoon with the Greek soldiers who were plying us with ouzo. Fortunately, had some blackbush with us, so it was quite messy, messy border crossing. So eventually we got on the coach and we got into Pristina, and we arrived very late at night after the long delay. It was about 11 o'clock at night. They take you to what's called the UN Hotel, which was just this ramshackle building where all new arrivals end up. And then you do, I think it's a 4-day induction course. But when we arrived, there was a disco on in there. So, of course, on the top of the ouzo and the blackbush, we availed of the bar and had a few cans. Just briefly on the induction, so we had to do an English test. We had to do a driving test. Basically, the driving test was like 50 or 60 meters where you had to weave through some cones. And I think there was a guy from Ghana who flipped it, not the day I was there, but he flipped the vehicle. And then there was a shooting test, which was just 10 rounds from 5 meters. So it was very, very basic on the induction. And you got a couple of lectures, and that also gave me my first insight into the UN and how people conduct themselves. So we got this talk by a US police officer. And the guy, I would say, was maybe about 29, 30 years old. Tall, big, physical, looked like a sort of outside receiver type. plenty of badges on his uniform, gave his name, which I'll not go over the air here, and he said, a little bit about me. Back in the States, I'm chief of police. And we're thinking, geez, this guy's a
flyer.
A flyer, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, we deployed to our station and bumped into an American guy there, and I was saying about the induction, and this guy must be really impressive. He's chief of police. And he said, "Oh, you mean the school cop?" I was like, what do you mean? And he said, yeah, he's chief of police, but of a school campus. And he only has 4 guys under his control, and he has no power outside of the school campus. And there was a bit of a theme of that with some of the nations in the UN.
Obviously, the UN is known for being a bit of a gravy train, Andy. Were your allowances and for the finding your new house and all that all pretty good?
It seems to be the story of my life. I come to the party always late, as I did when I transferred across to Northern Ireland. But a lot of the other nations were there when we got there. A lot of the NGOs were there. Most of the accommodation had been taken up. And the UN idea is that they give you a daily allowance. And with that daily allowance, you will rent local accommodation and buy your own food. I believe, off the top of my head, the first month was $75 a day, and then it dropped down to $55. So depending on the exchange rate, it's either a good deal or a bad deal. But what we found was a lot of the NGOs had come in, and they have a big budget, so they'll take a house and just lay the money out. So we were very much down the pecking order when people were looking to rent their house out to us, because obviously our budget wasn't unlimited, and a lot of the other nationalities were already there and taken over houses. So you were allowed to stay in the UN hotel until you found a house, and you were basically talking to interpreters. There was a notice board up where there was houses. Eventually we went to view this house. I think it was one of the local admin staff said it was a relative of theirs, so we went to see this house, and there was going to be 4 of us moving in, and we had a look around it, and the house seemed to fit the bill. It didn't have running water, but there was a pipe outside where we could. But at that point we were so desperate to get somewhere, and we said, "Oh yes, we'll move in the next couple of days," and the people were, "No, we're going now." And I think they were frightened we would change their mind, and they basically woke the 2 children up, packed them up, and carried everything out whilst we were there.
It sounds like in the village in Salisbury Plain.
Yeah. I mean, it literally, they were so keen to secure the deal. And I think, off the top of my head, it was something like $300 a month.
Which would be a lot of money for them.
Yeah. And they moved in with, in case people think that we threw them out on the street, they moved in with other family members.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole point of this, though, is to inject money into the local economy as well, isn't it? That's why they try and make you live in the community a little bit. It's to help out the local economy and get that up and running again, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then once we got to our station and got established in our station, we had a very good interpreter who I'm still in touch with there today. He offered us, the 2 of us, to rent his grandfather's apartment. And his grandfather had worked very closely with Tito back in the day. And the apartment was on Mother Teresa Street. And we had a couple of balconies. It was on the 2nd floor. The really selling point for me was the back of the door had like a cage on it. So when you locked the door, it had like 5 barrels went across, but also a bar went up to the ceiling and down to the floor. We felt really secure with that. And then obviously the other vulnerable points with the balconies,
You must have been quite low in the pecking order for interpreters, mate, because it was a standard joke when I was in Bosnia that the higher the rank, the more attractive the interpreter. So you must have been at the bottom to get a male interpreter.
What we did notice as well, the military definitely had the better interpreters, both on skill set and as you say, on looks. We had a couple at our station that were really good, and the one that we had, if it got to a stage where if we couldn't get this interpreter or one other, then we would go without. We prefer to go without, because sometimes they cause more issues by interpreting what was being said.
Especially when
quite differently.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with those mixed communities and all the tensions and the history, and And you can usually tell, when you give a lengthy sentence and they say to that person in 3 words, your message isn't getting translated effectively.
Absolutely, and that came to the fore in an incident that we had at one point as well.
Yeah. I've worked in coalition forces in Cyprus and Iraq, and it's always quite a challenge when you're working with different nationalities. Can you just give us an overview of the countries who provide assistance and sort of how the different approaches were and tasks were allocated?
The UN runs on a system called national balance, where across all departments and all roles, there should be an even mix of nationality so that no one nationality dominates. And to a degree, that did happen in Kosovo. However, the nations that were in first got the pick of the key roles. The operations department was predominantly run by Americans. Criminal investigations was predominantly run by the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were excellent. The SFO role, or the SWAT role at the time, was predominantly German and Austrian, with members of GSG-9 and the Austrian equivalent. And then the other nations filtered in amongst that. During my time there, as we became established, because most of us started out on response, beat and patrol duties, couple of selected officers went into niche roles, and as our tour progressed, a lot of people moved up into different things, either were selected or by choice. Within our station, we had a mix of US officers, German, Austrian, Turkish, I think one Finnish, and a couple of Ghanaians. And it was really interesting, everybody's different motives for being there and how the government looked after them. So with the US officers, they were actually employed by a company called DynCorp. They'd had to resign their job back in the US and then got employed with DynCorp. They were on pretty good money. The Germans, they got additional pension contributions. They also got additional salary. And I think a lot of other nations did. Us, we just got our normal salary, and I think something ridiculous like £9.50 a day off the Foreign Office for hardship allowance. So when the temperature dropped down to -20, you're thinking, £9.50 will go a long way.
Mate, I'll tell you right now, right? You get no sympathy off me. I remember staggering on Christmas Day, and the main gate sang it at Fort George in Londonderry, and the RUC cop was telling me how much he was on, and I was a gunner at the time. So, RUC wages, you get no sympathy, mate, not from me. So, all joking aside, you got a right old mixture there, and
yeah.
It's easy to sort of have prejudices about other countries. Was there any countries that you initially thought going to be Mickey Mouse, but actually surprised you with their professionalism?
The Ghanaian guy, so we arrived there, and this Ghanaian guy came up to me, and he said, "Oh, RUC, you like the IRA, yes?" And with a really, really straight face, and then he just slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, only joking. You guys do a good job against them." There was a German Bundesgrenzschutz border guards, because before they got merged with the police. He held his hand out. He said, "I'm very pleased to meet you. I am Herman. I am the German." And they say that the Germans don't have a sense of humor. And again, it was very, very funny. We had a Russian there called Kalishnikov.
Really, that was his nickname, or that was his name?
I believe that was his name, but you had to stay clear of him when he was driving. His eyesight wasn't great. He wasn't the best of drivers, So the international mix was really interesting. I was really impressed with the Austrians and the Germans. We had a German shift leader on our shift, and I don't think I've worked for a better commander anywhere. His ability to make decisions, back you to the hilt, and do the right thing has stayed with me, and we're still firm friends now.
Yeah, it's nice when that happens, and it's a difficult job for everybody involved. I mean, I can imagine for the guys from Ghana and Fiji and all that, not only is that quite a significant cultural difference, it's the weather, the challenges there as well.
Funny enough, you've just reminded me, we did have a we had a Fijian on our shift, and it was the Fijians who provided all the prisoner escort in the detention centre. And the Fijian on our shift was a very, very tall guy. I was an older guy. I would say he must have been late 30s. And he had a big old Webley revolver. As you know, a lot of Americans are interested in guns. So one of the Americans asked him one day that if he could have a look, because he hadn't seen anything as old. And the Fijian took it out, and I thought, God, he hasn't cleared it to show him, but every nation's different. And he handed it over, and the American broke it and opened it, and he said, "There's no rounds in here." And he said, "Yeah, I know." He said, I might hurt somebody if it's loaded. Different world, you know.
Yeah, and you got to adapt, haven't you? So you mentioned the Glocks earlier, but you didn't have any rifles, I take it. But what were the threats, and what equipment, other weapons did you have, if any?
So when we deployed, we just had the Glocks, and the SFO team, they had MP5s. After my tour, they did bring in support weapons. I believe there were shotguns brought in, and MP5s, and a lot of that was to deal with the packs of wild dogs. During the war, obviously, everybody had left and evacuated, and the dogs were left to run. You used to see them lying on the hillside on the outskirts of town, just lying in the sun during the day. And on the night, they would come in and they would scavenge from the bins. And then when they couldn't scavenge from the bins, they took whatever they could. And I think there was a couple of children that had been bitten. But again, to give you sort of some overview of what the city was like at that time, obviously there was no bin collection. Maybe a bit like Birmingham at the moment, you know. And
Careful like that.
You know the big stat bins that you used to see,
big massive wheelie bins.
Yeah, huge big wheelie bins, metal ones. So they used to fill those and stamp them down, and then when they got filled to the brim, they would just set light to them and burn them. So there was this pervading smell of burning rubbish and smog over parts of the city, and then the smell was just awful, you know. You operate in that sort of environment, and you know the local people were just so ingenious at making do. For example, there was no filling stations, so they couldn't get fuel, and there was, as the UN does, they employ locals for as much as possible. So there's a guy who fills up the UN trucks every day for the police and for UN staff, and when he finished filling your tank up, he used to kink the pipe, and he'd trap about 1.5 meters of fuel in the pipe. And then as you pulled off, you'd see him empty it into a bucket. And that night, you'd see him sat at the road with Coke bottles selling fuel.
Yeah, clever man.
Yeah, very, very clever man, you know. And I would say that was one of the most highly sought after jobs in the UN.
Was there a threat to you? Were you targeted when you were in that house you're living in? Did you have to stag on at night?
You mean our country gentleman house?
Yeah, your country. Yeah, your house.
Yes. Our first period of threat came. We were doing a VCP this day up on one of the estates, and we stopped this Jeep Grand Cherokee with 2 young Albanians in. Spoke very good English, and they were had a bit of an attitude. On the basis of that, we searched the vehicle. When we lifted up the back seats, we found 2 empty 9mm casings. So obviously there'd been a weapon in the car. And again, their attitude was such that we decided we were going to search their house. And they said we couldn't search their house because it belonged to his uncle, who was a senior officer in the TMK, or local militia. We said, well, that's not a concern of ours. So we went up to the apartment. His wife let us in. We searched the property, and we got a Scorpion submachine gun, 2 or 3 grenades, a Tokarev pistol, and 70,000 Deutschmarks. So at this point, we've called our shift leader down, the German commander, to supervise what we were doing and get his take on it. And he authorized the detention, but he overheard the guy's wife getting a message out for the husband to come down with his full protection team. And we found out after that we were then under threat by his protection team. He was eventually arrested as well, but the UN backed down on it, and he got everything back. but we were then changing routes to work and wearing second chance body armour to and from our apartment. The other incident which you were referring to, Colin, was although we had that apartment there, the army on the outskirts of town, there was a little village called Matachan, and they had a small section in there looking after a vulnerable family. Towards the end of their tour, they didn't have the resources, so they had to collapse that position. And this was a 3-story house with a garden, a dog and a pig, probably the last pig in Pristina. And as they were moving out, they said, look, it's rent-free. Why don't you have that, save some rent? So myself and the guy I was living with moved in. The first couple of days was fine. We heard somebody out in the garden one night, so we had a look about, couldn't see anything. And we went to work the following day and we come back and they burnt us out. Now, I don't know whether it was targeted against us or the fact that the pig was on the premises, but we came back, the house was in flames and the pig and the dog had gone.
It's very, very easy to underestimate the type of people you're dealing with over there, because
very much so.
They do have access, as you just alluded to, grenades, long rifles, handguns, the whole lot, and they wouldn't be shy about killing people either.
And again, what we used to do, myself and the guy I was working with, we were always deployed together. We were both from the teams back in Northern Ireland. Even though I hadn't worked with him before, we come from the same background, so we shared the house together. We went on shift together. It was worse than being married at times, because as you can imagine, we worked 30 days straight before you got any time off. And then you got 6 days off, but it really wasn't worthwhile going home for 6. So most of us tended to work 40 plus. So you accumulated extra days and half days. But once you got above about 40 days,
you're ready to go.
You're snapping at each other, and especially when you're living together, you're working together. It was, we did have some fallouts, but as well as that, the winters, as you know, out there are quite harsh. It dropped to -20 at times. We maybe had electricity for 1 or 2 hours a day. You may not be in your apartment. What we ended up doing was, and again, because of the unique relationship we had with the army, was after our 8-hour shift, we would stay at work and work, if you like, to the army. So if they were going to go and do a search, we would provide a police presence. If they had a job that they wanted doing, and they preferred to work with us than other nationalities, we would do it. And we might as well be at work in a warm car or sat in their TV room. The unit we were with was 2 Royal Green Jackets. So in the TV room was back-to-back sharp videos,
Double everywhere.
But what a cracking bunch, And on the back of us doing extra hours for them, they said, what can we do for you? So I said, any chance of a couple of 10-man ration packs? I never thought I'd see the day when I'm asking for ration packs. And they said, yeah, you can have a couple, but why don't the 2 of you come and eat in the cookhouse? And we, out of the 60 RUC, we were the only 2 invited into the military cookhouse. So on duty or off duty, we used to come up 3 meals a day. And again, as you know, the food's cracking,
Yeah, I've said it on a few podcasts. Everybody likes to take the piss out of chefs, but they're actually on operations. The scran that they can normally work up is pretty damn good. Obviously, so you got this threat in the background. You're carrying weapons. What was the ROE, the rules of engagement that you operated under?
Again, it was pretty much for us along the lines of the UK. You used your judgment. And again, going back to our pre-deployment training, we'd done judgmental training, which is the firearms trainer, which is like a TV version where the instructor can press a button and do different strands depending on whether your challenges are robust, or if you're weak, then the victim could get stabbed or shot. And that judgmental training was quite invaluable. So your rules of engagement, we really based ourselves on UK rules of engagement. And one of the incidents we went to, again, I think it was one of the times when we were freelancing for the army. They said that somebody in an apartment had been threatened by his neighbour with a grenade. They wanted to take over his apartment. Asked if we would just go and check it out. So, of course, we banged on the door. You hear music playing, no reply. Banged again, no reply. So we've put the door in. And about 2 paces in front of me is a guy with quite a large knife. I've drawn the Glock on him and I'm shouting a challenge. The interpreter's on my shoulder shouting the challenge in the local language, and he puts the knife down. We've stepped forward, recovered the knife. I've still got the Glock on him. And I asked the interpreter if he knows anything about a grenade. Some things you wish you never say. And then he puts his hand in his pocket and produces a Soviet grenade.
Was the pin still in it?
The pin was still in it. But my eyes were the size of dinner plates.
It's time to be right.
And so I asked him, the interpreter, to put it down, which he did, and he backed off, and we moved forward. We recovered the grenade. We sat down with him and said, look, your neighbour's not moving anywhere. You can't take over his apartment. Here's my name. I'm at Station 2. Come and see me if you have any of the problems. And we were in and out in under 10 minutes. And we're back to the station, and it was 2 lines in the book. Neighbourly dispute, advice given, 1 knife, 1 grenade seized, and you went to the next job. Now, in the UK, that would be cordons, negotiators, evacuation of the apartments.
Yeah.
And it was just, you cracked on.
2 lines in an occurrence book.
Part of Kosovo was like a cross between Life on Mars and Mad Max and The Bill.
Yeah.
All rolled into different days.
Great quote, mate. I think I'll put that in as the podcast title somewhere. I love that.
The driving in Kosovo was crazy. A lot of high-end German vehicles there, Mercedes, BMW, Audis, all still with German plates on, which had been stolen. Guys driving like crazy. We had a couple of times soldiers doing VCP duty, doing the stopping, were nearly hit by vehicles. So I was able to get stingers. And instead of having the stinger at the back of the VCP, so to get anything crashing through, we got an extra soldier out the front who's doing cover to control the stinger. And if vehicles were driving erratically or at speed, it was totally at his discretion to sting them, which the guys absolutely loved. I think we stung 5 vehicles in a 15-minute period one night. Now, bearing in mind that in Kosovo at that time, they're write-offs because you can't get new tyres. You can't get them repaired. Didn't go down too well with the locals, but from about the next day onwards, the driving, when we were setting VCPs up with stingers, were greatly improved. And I know the Green Jackets found that they're very reassuring and very much enjoyable.
I remember when I went to Northern Ireland the first time, we didn't have stingers. We had actual caltrops, those proper iron caltrops.
Yeah.
They weighed about 20 pounds. You had to carry it around in your day sack. And then the second time we went out, they actually issued us stingers.
Right, yeah.
I remember you had to check the new caltrops in the bag because you could end up pulling them out and there would be about 3 teeth left in them. It would be like a set of tramp's teeth.
That was another aspect of the trust basis that we had and the advantage we had over other nations. The history we had working alongside the army for decades in Northern Ireland. It just transferred across.
We did a podcast the other month there about the training experience for Northern Ireland. And we talked about how the RUC were closely involved in that. But one thing we didn't mention was that the RUC used to have, when you used to go to Tin City, the RUC used to send police over there to advise you and go out on the exercise patrols with you, that sort of thing. So you're right, that relationship was being built up prior to soldiers even going out to Northern Ireland.
And on the first, if you like, the first RUC tour, all of us were deployed within Pristina. So we were within the British Army's TOR. And as I said before, it was 2RGJ. And I was with support company. And they had been, I don't know if you remember, a drama from the 90s called Warriors about the British Army in Bosnia.
Made quite an impact, that series.
I think it was a 2-part or something like that. Anyway, the company we were with had provided all the extras. So it was really interesting talking to them about that. And then when I watched it later, you could see a lot of the guys I knew. And then last year when I was working on a job and I met Damian Lewis, who'd been one of the characters in it. And I mentioned this, and now bearing in mind this was done, I think, late 90s. I just said, I happened to meet the unit. And his first words out of his mouth, 2RGJ, what a great picture, guys. Cool. Yeah, for him to remember the abbreviation, and because the fact that 2RGJ don't exist anymore now in that format, I think speaks volumes for the professionalism of the guys.
Yeah. I was quite fortunate. I need to do a podcast on it. I took a team out to Bosnia in about think it was 98. And we ended up doing a couple, joining up with the Green Jackets recce platoon, and they'd just come back. I think it was from COP in Belfast. So we ended up working with them for a couple of years, quite a few months in jobs in Bosnia. A really interesting time, nice bit of cross-training, but they made us welcome.
Great bunch. Remember Millennium New Year's Eve, sitting on the steps of our police station in a stroke of midnight with the CSM and company commander sipping Bushmills from a paper cup, watching the tracer go over the station roof all over the city. Top.
Yeah, it's something about these foreign countries like Iraq, Afghanistan. Whenever there's a celebration, they get the AKs out for an unload into the sky, forgetting those rounds have still got to land somewhere.
So-called happy shooting, you know. Every wedding was the same there as well.
Just for my knowledge, Mike, 'cause I don't know this one. Did the RUC have a version of the Army's yellow card, rules for opening fire, or was it there was nothing written down you had to carry on you?
You just went along, common law and codes of practice.
Right, got you.
And that's pretty much what we took with us to Kosovo.
What were the operational realities of working alongside the military in Kosovo compared to your previous experiences in Northern Ireland? Because for listeners who don't know, not only did you serve with the RUC in Northern Ireland, you also did a tour there as a British soldier.
It's like meeting up with a long-lost friend again. It was just so easy. They understood us. We understood them. We were doing joint VCP operations. They needed us when they had a bump in traffic or they damaged something on a search. We needed them for rations. We were able to buy a portable TV off them, and they wired us up for BFBS. People are saying, God, you watch BFBS, but there was nothing else.
Needs must.
Yeah, needs must, and it was very much a two-way street. And just operating with a military that was skilled in that type of operation, how professional the military were in dealing with, and their humour as well, is just invaluable. And we had some great times out there with the military guys. And I know they really appreciated when we arrived and carrying on the work which had been done in Northern Ireland and the cooperation.
I think sometimes the British Army experience in Northern Ireland is a bit overblown, and where the British Army and the government a lot of times says it could be transferred to. But I think Kosovo at that time, it probably was that ideal transfer of skills. When you've got an army unit with experience of Northern Ireland, then yourselves coming in, that transfer of skills into that environment is probably one of the best fits. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I think as well that the slight difference between Kosovo and Northern Ireland for the people deploying, for the officers deploying from Northern Ireland, was that actually the military were in the ascendancy, even though the UNMIC police mission had sort of legal primacy. The conditions on the ground and how we needed to find places to live, we needed to feed ourselves. The military were established and they were always there helping hand. Simple things like bottled water. Bottled water eats into your budget. The military had shed loads of it. And they would quite happily help you out with it. And I think some of the officers that went out on our first deployment were used to how in the IUC were the dominant part of the relationship. You had that better standard of life because you were going home to your family. You were going home. You had a normal life outside it. Well, you were on a tour just like the military were on a tour. However, they had better infrastructure. All right, they might be sharing rooms, but they had the little tuck shop on site. They had the 2-can rule. They had the TV room. They'd made a gym up. I mean, in the station we were, the TV room we were operating out of an old Serb police station. There was still, bloodstains on the walls down in the TV room in the gym that the military used.
Is that where they've been beating people up during interrogations and things?
Supposedly, yeah. But the military had that infrastructure where we just, all right, you were renting a house. Yes, when you weren't on duty, you were free to go down. And, there were certain restaurants open. There were certain bars open. But it wasn't the freedom that you had back at home. So it's the feeling I got anyway that the military were invaluable in what they could do and the relationship that we had with them.
The question perhaps I should have asked earlier, where were the local police at this point? Were they disbanded?
My understanding is that they'd fled because they were being predominantly pro-Serb and had supported the regime. So they pretty much fled. And when I arrived, there was no Kosovo police service, and that came into being as we were there. There was an initial recruitment, and then they were dispersed amongst the stations. It wasn't something which appealed to me to be on the mentoring side. I was very much enjoying the law enforcement side, possibly because I was coming from a more specialist role, and this was taking me back to my very roots of policing. And because myself and the guy I was working with were so proactive, we had quite a few arrests. Our commander decided that we wouldn't be used for mentoring. We would just be allowed to do what we were doing on the law enforcement side, and then also freelancing with the army. So I just saw others mentoring, and probably they had a better temperament for it.
Yeah, I think when you're mentoring foreign police forces, foreign armies, it does take a specialist skill set. But one of the principles of policing in the United Kingdom is policing by consent. So how were you perceived by the locals, and how were you viewed by the local organised crime groups?
A good few of the locals obviously were happy with the changing regime, and we were initially welcomed. And then, as there's always opportunists which want to take advantage of the situation, and criminality was rife. One of the biggest problems there was parts being stolen off the Land Rovers in the backyard from the military. They were quite proactive in dealing with that themselves, and they never brought that to our door. I'll just leave that one there.
Bit of local patriotism.
They did have some ideas of their own, which we'll just leave. But yeah, so there was a lot of criminality, a lot of weapons floating around. You could make a difference with people who required help, and then you came up against the people who were causing the crime, and obviously we weren't welcomed by them at all. We were seen as an inconvenience. I think we were looked at as something that they just need to bide their time and we'll move on.
Yeah.
And then they'll have another go when the Kosovo Police Service is set up.
Have you been back to Kosovo since?
No, I haven't. I talked about it with my old German boss for our 25th anniversary, sort of last year, and our diaries didn't link up. I would like to go back and see where it is and look around the area where we operated, see what changes have been made,
I'd imagine it's a bit like Bosnia, a bit like Northern Ireland, where it's progressed, infrastructure's got better and all the rest of it, but those underlying tensions between the different communities, I've no doubt they're still ticking along. And I always remember talking to a guy, and he was a local in Bosnia, and he was saying, he goes, we're all quiet today, he goes, but we have been doing this for centuries. It might not happen in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, but at some point in the future it will kick off again.
Yeah, and when we were there, all the trouble was up at Mitrovica, over the bridge. Part of the unit that were in Pristina were deployed up there, the army unit. We didn't have anything to do with it. It was predominantly French police up there, which was a different side of the UN mission we didn't see. So all of the French, for some reason, were deployed in Mitrovica. We had no French in Pristina at all.
They always got to be doing their own thing, the French, haven't they?
Yeah, there is that side of it,
So what lessons did you learn personally from your experiences over there? Because you're an experienced soldier, you're an experienced cop on the UK mainland, you're an experienced cop in uniform in Northern Ireland, and you were an E4. So I'm just wondering, there's a lot of experience there from you, but did you actually take anything away from that deployment?
Yeah, I think it was more personally because, as I've sort of alluded to, once you got above the 40 days and you were pushing 50, maybe 50 plus days, you were very grouchy. You did become desensitized to some of the things you saw. In the first weeks when we were out there, you used to see the 6 and 7 year old kids out at 11 o'clock at night selling boxes of cigarettes. And it used to be, God, what's happening here? How where's the parents? How do they allow that? And as you go on, it's just, you see them and then it's just, well, they're out there and that's that. There's nothing we can do about it. What we found when we were dealing with people and stopping people, they all came out with similar lines, Honestly, I tell you the truth. You can beat me, you can kick me, but I'm telling the truth. And it's like everybody says, well, we're not going to beat you, we're not going to kick you. But, and I've heard this many, many times, and you do tend to desensitize a bit to the environment. And I think looking back, the lesson I learned was that to have that patience and to have that understanding and to count to 10 and try and stay calm. And that's not easy.
No, I totally agree. And I know exactly where you're coming from, mate. I mean, my first tour of Northern Ireland in the late 80s, as a young soldier without any operational experience, you're quite idealistic. And it's easy to have that idealism knocked out of you by the realities of an operational tour. And also what you experience can make you very, very cynical. And I think holding on to your humanity and your decency is a real struggle, but is essential if you want to be somebody who's a professional soldier or a professional policeman, but also somebody who's going to have the moral compass to do the job correctly.
Yeah, I totally agree, Colin. And I've no doubt there were many on my deployment that went there because they wanted to help the people of Kosovo. They wanted to make a difference. A small part of me, yes, I wanted to do that, but my personal reason to go there was I had a very young daughter. I was in a very unhappy marriage, which I knew would never last. Quite selfishly, I went there to see how I would cope, not seeing my daughter on a daily basis, but in a controlled environment. Because part of our conditions of going were, if at any point you wanted to leave, you just said, and you'd be gone within 2 days. And I knew the relationship would never last. And at some point, I would not see my daughter on a daily basis. So how would this work for me? So very cynical doing that.
That's quite extreme, though, isn't it?
It is extreme, but if the relationship, and it did break down, but if it had broken down back there, I'm then in this position where I'm not seeing on a daily basis. And I'd already endured a period of time of being very unhappy, but I was still seeing my daughter. It was just something that I did. And then when I did go home, I spent every possible minute maximizing and building the relationship with my daughter to such a degree that when the relationship did break down, she came and lived with me.
It's a very male thing to do that. I'll just throw myself away, miles away from home, extreme environment, and see how I cope. Were you a bit worried about the effects it would have on your daughter?
Yeah, before I sort of gave my reason here on the pod tonight, we spoke about this because I didn't want her to come across this or listen to it, and we had spoken about it in the past as well as to the reason why I went. And for me, it was just at some point this day will come where I won't be seeing her on a daily basis. So how does this look like? How does it affect her at that age? And, and we had use of the military phone system, the military cards and blueies as well. So we sent blueies. And yeah, that was my personal reason for going. And while I was out there, on one of the trips I didn't come home, the UN and the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, both organized flights, free flights, so you could bid for these flights, put your name down. The UN one went to Rome and the OSCE one went to Vienna. My wife came out to Vienna and I flew over to Vienna, and I think we had a couple of days in Vienna, went to Prague, trying to talk things through in that. We're just papering cracks, I
think it's weird that we're talking about this because you often hear military podcasts and they talk about operations, but they rarely talk about the effect on families. But it's something that preoccupies you every minute you're away. If you're in a close relationship,
absolutely,
you've got children, there's not a day goes by that you don't think about them. But whereas when you're in danger at any one time, they don't. And I always remember one of the most stupid things I did. I just got married and I was off on operations in Iraq. And I gave my wife, a couple of days before I was due to leave, I handed my wife a buff envelope and said, if anything happens to me, everything he needs in here.
Yeah.
And my wife just looked at me, and she won't mind me saying this, she got really upset about it. And I was just thinking, I was trying to think I was being practical and squared away, but my my method of dealing with it with her was completely wrong. So when I went away on my next operational tour, I gave it to a mate and said, if anything happens to me, can you make sure my wife gets that? Sometimes I think we get wrapped up in things, and yes, you are thinking about your family, but I think too many times you put the job first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know over the subsequent years when she did come to live with me, and I was having to run the household with au pairs, and the phone would go and there'd be a job in that would maybe last, a couple of days. It's time I'll never ever get back again. It's what you do, and thankfully, she's turned out so well, and probably our proudest achievement,
It's a measure of you as well,
who she is. Thanks, but who she is and how she is. You used to see the kids in Kosovo, and you're thinking, God, that could be her. She could have been born into that environment.
I always, when I got married, I said to my wife, "You have to realise the army will always come first, and you'll come second." And I think she thought I was joking.
Yeah. But it's sometimes as brutal as that. Just before we wrap up, though, an overview of Kosovo when we arrived. You're seeing these surgically strikes on buildings that are being taken out. And again, this probably goes back to your question about the contrast to Northern Ireland. The battalion that was there was mechanized. So there'd be warriors at every location and the odd scimitar. And then you've got these buildings taken out with surgical strikes. You've got this lingering smell of burning rubbish over the city and packs of wild dogs lying around on the outside. And then you're doing a joint VCP with the military as you had done in Northern Ireland. Aspects were really familiar, and other parts of it
up another level, if you like, isn't it? In some respects,
it gets you to that quote I said to you: "The life on Mars meets Mad Max."
Yeah. But yeah, all good experiences. Well, Andy,
absolutely, mate.
Well, there's a couple of times you could have probably done with a warrior on the Falls Road, but hey, rules and engagement would never allow it. So, as we wrap up, mate, no Desert Island debts because you've already been on before. But are you reading anything at the minute?
Yes, mate. I'm reading a couple of things at the moment. After you had Chris Cox on, I've read his books, and I've read a couple on the Bushwar there. But what I've just finished reading is a book about the Alamo. A Time to Stand goes into all the myths and everything, and quite an interesting read, and it debunks a lot of the stuff at the end. It basically shows how they were worn down by constant barrage and playing of music and by the Mexicans.
Like psyops, basically, early psychological operations.
And the last movie that was put out, the one with Billy Bob Thornton on, is probably one of the more accurate ones, where most of the Texans were sleeping. Santa Ana had this prearranged night attack to take the Alamo. But there's some interesting little vignettes and side stories in it.
So who wrote it? What's the title of the book and who wrote it?
Well, I'll get you the author now. Walter Lund.
I'll put the links for that in the show notes. So my book I'm going to recommend is actually a bit of a myth buster that you put me onto, and I listened to it a couple of years ago. And it's the one about Island Wala. No Finer Way to Die. Is that the name of it?
No Better Way for Man to Die.
No Better Way for Man to Die. And I can't remember the author, but I'll put it in the show notes.
Mike Snook. Snook is.
That was a great book.
Colonel Mike Snook. Oh, that's, as I said to you when I sort of mentioned it on the last pod, you're listening or reading the bits. I think it's about Waddell's company fighting back towards the main camp. And even though you know the outcome, you're thinking, he's going to make it. He's going to make it.
Your heart's in your mouth, and it's amazing. Like a lot of things in history, if a few things had gone a bit better for them, the outcome might have been a lot different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just on such fine margins.
Well, mate, Andy, thanks for coming on.
No, thank you, Colin. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, mate. So that's it for another episode. Thanks to Andy and also to you, the listener, for your continued support and suggestions, and please keep them coming. And our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you download us from iTunes and like the podcast, it would be great if you leave a review there or anywhere you get podcasts from. And finally, thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing help and offering technical support for his company ISAR. And we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.